We often think of cancer as this mysterious, terrifying force that comes out of nowhere. But when you get right down to it, it's a biological story. It's the story of a single normal cell that starts breaking the most fundamental rules of the body. So, what are these rules? And how in the world does a cell learn to break every single one of them? Let's dive in. Think about it. Your body is like this massive, perfectly organized society of trillions of cells. Everyone's got a job to do, and they all cooperate to keep you going. So what happens when one of those citizens goes rogue? What is the tipping point that turns a loyal, hardworking cell into a rebel that threatens the whole system? Well, this image shows it perfectly. Cancer isn't like flipping a switch. It's a slow-motion takeover. It all starts with one tiny mutation, which leads to a little too much growth. That's called hyperplasia. Then the cells start looking weird and disorganized, which is dysplasia. It's like a domino effect. More and more mutations pile up until you've got a full-blown invasive cancer. It's a cellular coup d'etat. So to really understand this rebellion, we first have to understand the law of the land. What are the rules that normal, healthy cells are supposed to be following in the first place? See, normal cells are basically polite, law-abiding citizens. First off, they don't just divide whenever they feel like it. They wait for a specific go signal from outside. They also respect personal space. When they bump up against their neighbors, they stop growing. That's a huge rule called contact inhibition. They also stay put in their own neighborhood. And, crucially, they know when it's time to retire. They have a built-in limit on how many times they can divide. And this is our roadmap for the whole story. A couple of brilliant scientists, Douglas Hanahan and Robert Weinberg, identified these 6 key abilities a cell has to pick up to become truly cancerous. These are the 6 rules that have to get broken. Think of this as the cancer cell's official playbook. Let's walk through it. Okay, so the very first act of rebellion, the most fundamental one, is for the cell to take control of its own growth. It basically decides, you know what? I don't need your permission to divide anymore. I'm my own boss now. And this happens because of a 2-part failure in the cell's main control system. Just imagine you're in a car. You've got an accelerator to make it go, and you've got brakes to make it stop. Well, cancer is what happens when your accelerator gets jammed all the way to the floor and somebody cuts your brake lines. In our cells, those accelerator genes are called oncogenes, and the brake genes, we call those tumor suppressors. So let's look at that jammed accelerator. These genes don't actually start out as bad guys. They begin as normal genes called proto-oncogenes, and their job is to regulate healthy growth. But then, a mutation, maybe from something like UV light from the sun or a chemical, can damage that gene. It flips a switch, turning it into a cancer-promoting oncogene that is now permanently screaming, "Go, go, go!" And here are the brakes, or the broken brakes. There's a gene called P53 that's basically the guardian of our entire genome. It's the emergency brake. When it senses DNA damage, it slams on the brakes, stops the cell from dividing, and calls in a repair crew. If the damage is just too bad to fix, P53 orders the cell to, well, commit suicide. But when P53 itself gets mutated, and this happens in over half of all cancers, that emergency brake is just gone. Damaged cells get a green light to keep dividing, passing on all their mistakes, and taking another step towards becoming cancerous. Okay, so now the cell is dividing completely out of control. But there's another major safety system that it has to take out: the body's built-in self-destruct mechanism. To be a successful rebel, a cell doesn't just need to grow, it needs to learn how to cheat death. And that self-destruct sequence has a name: apoptosis. You can think of it as programmed cell death. It's this really elegant, orderly process the body uses to get rid of cells that are old, damaged, or just not needed anymore. And it is, without a doubt, one of our most powerful defenses against cancer. And as you can see here, this process is incredibly clean. The cell just shrinks, neatly packages itself up into these little disposable bags, and then immune cells come along and tidy everything up. No mess, no fuss, no inflammation. So a cancer cell has to figure out a way to completely short-circuit this entire process. By dodging apoptosis, it can survive all sorts of damage that would have been a death sentence for any normal cell. So dodging the self-destruct signal is one thing, but there's actually another clock ticking on every single one of your cells. At the very tips of our chromosomes, we have these little protective caps called telomeres. And the analogy here is just perfect. They're like the little plastic tips on your shoelaces. They keep all the important genetic information from fraying and falling apart. Now here's the catch.
Every single time a cell divides, those little shoelace tips, the telomeres, get a tiny bit shorter. And after about 50 divisions or so, they get so short that it sends a signal to the cell to stop dividing permanently. It's time to retire. But cancer cells discover this incredible cheat code. They find a way to switch on an enzyme called telomerase, which goes around and constantly rebuilds the telomeres. This pretty much makes the cell immortal, letting it divide forever. So at this point, our rubble cell is dividing uncontrollably, and it's basically immortal. But to go from just a small cluster of problem cells to a truly dangerous tumor, it's going to need resources. It needs to build an empire. See, a tumor can't grow any larger than about the head of a pin without its own blood supply. It gets starved of oxygen and nutrients, so it does something truly remarkable called angiogenesis. It starts sending out chemical signals, like a molecule called VEGF, that essentially trick the body into growing brand new blood vessels that lead directly into the tumor. It builds its own private supply lines. And this slide just shows you why that's such a game changer. On the left, you've got this small, contained tumor. But on the right, after it performs angiogenesis, it's plugged into the body's entire circulatory system. Now it has all the fuel it needs to grow like crazy, and even more dangerously, it now has a highway system that it can use to spread. Which leads us to the final and most lethal broken rule: metastasis. This is when the cancer cell breaks free from home, invades the tissue next door, and actually squeezes its way into a blood vessel. Then it has to survive this incredibly dangerous journey through your bloodstream, dodging the immune system, until it finally gets out of the vessel somewhere else in the body and sets up a new colony. This ability to spread is what makes cancer so deadly. So we've just walked through the 6 rules a cell absolutely must break to become a full-blown cancer. But why is understanding this playbook so incredibly important? Well, because this whole framework just transforms how we look at cancer. It's not just a chaotic mess of growth anymore. We can see it's a logical, albeit deadly, progression of skills that a cell has to acquire. By understanding how cancer feeds itself, how it dodges the cops, how it resists death and becomes immortal, we know its strategies. We've cracked its code. This table makes it all so concrete. Each one of those broken rules we talked about is tied to a specific physical change in the cell's machinery. Activating an oncogene like RAS, losing a tumor suppressor like retinoblastoma, turning on telomerase. These aren't just abstract ideas. They are physical things that we can actually target. The original scientists who figured this out summed it up perfectly. It's a process. Cells don't just wake up one day and become cancerous. They learn how to do it by acquiring these distinct abilities, one broken rule at a time. And that brings us to the most crucial takeaway. Knowing your enemy's playbook is the first step to defeating it. So this leaves us with a really powerful and honestly hopeful question. If we know the exact rules that cancer breaks to survive, can we design therapies that are smart enough to enforce those rules all over again? Can we create drugs that fix the brakes, that turn off the accelerator, and cut the fuel lines for good? That is the central challenge and the incredible promise of modern cancer research.